Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. Colonel Keith Reeves, B-2 stealth bomber pilot of the United States Air Force, retired, is here with us this evening, and I cannot wait to get him here on the show and share his story, as well as so many amazing things about that aircraft. It is probably one of the most beautiful and yet deadly aircraft in the United States Air Force fleet. It's really something, and his story is wonderful as well. So cannot wait to get him to join us this evening. Now, before we get started, just a few things. We are in the last days of SocialFlight's Fly to Win Challenge. We are giving away a Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset. This beautiful headset right here, we are giving this away on December 1st. So be sure to check that out. All you need to do is get the free SocialFlight mobile app for Apple and Android devices. Just get out there and fly. Check in. Even if it's at your local airport just once, you are entered in to that December 1st prize giveaway. Now, in addition to that, if you fly into multiple airports, then you can get more points, track all that, and you can be on our leaderboard and get additional entries into that drawing. In addition, of course, we'll be rolling forward with more Fly to Win challenges. We always have a challenge going at SocialFlight and giving away some amazing, really great prizes. So anyway, very, very excited about that. Tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Lightspeed, and Lightspeed and that Delta Zulu headset with the Canary feature, which is great for carbon monoxide detection. It is really an amazing feature built into that for that. And in addition to that, it has customized EQ feature that like maps what your hearing is and then adjusts it to that. That's called hearing EQity, and that is also, that comes with that headset. Now, Lightspeed has a special going on right now for people. Of course, you don't win the headset. There is a special going on in December where they are giving away, with purchase of one of those headsets, a special setup that actually includes an additional battery and this very cool charger. This thing is actually a two-piece setup, and it's a charger that actually flips out, has a stand for it, and very, very cool stuff. I've flown with this headset. It's truly wonderful, and encourage all of you to check that out. Now, to tonight's show, I'd like to introduce and begin with Colonel Keith Reeves. He graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1992 and began his military flying career at the helm of the legendary B-52 bomber out of Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. After 5 years commanding B-52, he was board selected for the B-2 stealth bomber program out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. He flew combat during Operation Iraqi Freedom, instructed in the formal training unit, and served as deputy commander of the 509th Operations Group. Colonel Reeves retired from the Air Force in 2018 and is now a captain on the Boeing 737 for a major airline. In addition to being an accomplished military and commercial pilot, Keith is an avid General Aviation pilot and former CFI, flying his Vans RV-8. He has over 3,000 military hours, 2,800 commercial aviation hours, and 930 GA hours. I am thrilled to have him with us tonight. Please help me welcome to SocialFlight Live, Colonel Keith Reeves. I'll bring him on the line now. How are you doing?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I have to tell you, the B-2 bomber is one of the most beautiful aircraft to look at. I mean, it's just gorgeously sculpted. But I want to start with your story. So tell me a little bit about like how you got started, what brought you to the Air Force and the Academy?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again, and I'm really happy to be here. So I first got my introduction to jets through my father. He was not a pilot, but he was an aviation enthusiast, and he was in the Army, and we were based on the island of Okinawa, Japan, back in the early 1970s. And I guess I was about 4 years old. or so. And at the time, the Vietnam War was winding down. They had a lot of airplanes supporting the conflict there. One of them, the SR-71, and you know that plane. It's very loud, and it would take off right over our house, and the house would shake, the windows would rattle, and my dad would point out what those airplanes were. And also at the time, they had F4s, they had KC-135s, and he would identify them to me, and I was able to identify them just by the sound that they would make when they flew overhead. And they'd fly overhead, and I would point them out to my mom, and without seeing them, I'm pretty sure she thought it was some kind of witchcraft. Me at 4 years old identifying these airplanes. So that was my first recollection and first introduction to jets. And so fast forward a few years, and he was assigned to work at the M1 tank plant in Michigan, and we had base housing on Selfridge Air National Guard Base. So now we're talking late 70s, early 1980s, and at the time they had F4s, A7s, C-130s. The Navy had a unit of P-3s, and so there are always jets flying overhead. And I would often walk home from school and walk down the flight line row, and security wasn't what it is today at the time, and I would walk into hangars and just lean against the wall and stare at mechanics pulling panels off of F4s, and I found it fascinating. I did. And then one day, the Thunderbirds came to Selfridge and put on an air show, and I'd never seen, you know, an acrobatic display of any kind, much less the Thunderbirds, and they blew my mind. They were flying the T-38s at the time, and I remember just being a fantastic show, so awesome that in the days after the show, it was summertime, and I got together with some about 5 of my neighborhood buddies, and we put together for our parents. We had them come outside, and we put together a Thunderbird demonstration on our bicycles, complete with death-defying knife-edge passes, and we had our four-ship, four-bike diamond formation. It was utterly ridiculous, a total clown show, but that's how much it inspired me. And so, you know, I just kind of grew up around jets, and fast forward a few years, again, I was fortunate to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy, and that's what how I got my start in aviation.
So let's continue. You're outside the Air Force Base and have unfettered access to some degree compared to what people would have today.
Crazy.
So tell me a little bit about how that led to then, you know, not everybody gets into the academy. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just the constant exposure to jets, at least in 2 of my father's assignments in the Army. And it's kind of ironic, he was in the Army, but we always seem to end up on Air Force bases. But you know, you know, I was 4 years old in Okinawa and 10 years old at Selfridge, and I would just walk around with my head up at the sky all the time, and just developed a curiosity, not just about what it was like flying them, but also how they worked. I scarfed up every book that I could read on jets and engines, and just found it fascinating. And my dad, he was kind of mechanically oriented as well, was always tinkering on cars and fixing things. And so I think that mechanical nature of his mind also kind of bled over to me a little bit, and I just wanted to understand how aircraft worked and how they flew.
Wow. And so what does it take to get into the academy? What was your journey to that?
Yeah, so it shouldn't be a surprise. It helps to have a good grades. No one needs to be perfect. My grades certainly weren't, but you know, they're okay. I do, if I mentor people that are interested in the academy, I say that the academy is more looking for someone who is well-rounded as opposed to perfect in any one area. I mean, they're not going to turn their nose up at someone who's a valedictorian, but that's not what they're necessarily looking for. They want someone that is you know, strong in academics, but not necessarily a 4.0. Someone who has an aptitude for athletics, but you know, you don't have to be a star athlete, and certainly someone who has displayed leadership potential. But you know, it's not necessary that you are president of your student council or whatever, but you need to have at least a representation of all those areas. And you know, I guess I had those things. And then at some point you need to be nominated by a either a congressman, a senator, or if you're a son or daughter of a veteran, you have the opportunity to apply to the president for a nomination, which is how I received mine. I know that at the time it was President Reagan. He didn't actually read my application. Of course, his staff did, but I did get a presidential nomination. But most people get a nomination from the congressman or from the senator. And then if you get a nomination, those packages go forward to the Academy Selection Board, and they select the personnel that they are interested in.
Wow, what was your experience going through the academy like?
You know, I had I won't say a good time, but it was where I wanted to be. I mean, it certainly is a challenge. If you know, you fell apart getting yelled at, probably not the best place for you, but it's quite an experience as far as filling up every minute of every day with activities, if not academics, and you're doing some type of activity or athletics. Obviously, marching is a big piece. Lots of programs, especially aviation related. A large soaring program, parachuting, just to name a few. Lots of opportunities to exercise leadership. And this goes on for all 4 years. Of course, the first year as a freshman, it's very regimented, very few freedoms. And you know, they do what they can to strip down personal identity, not, in my opinion, not in a malicious way, but in a way that tries to ingrain that, hey, the unit, the cadet wing, or the your class is more important than your individual needs. And you know, it's a challenge, but not any one thing is too much of a challenge for someone to be able to overcome. It's more of a mental game. Just try to load you up with stress and see how you perform.
So what was your first assignment after you graduated?
Yeah, so I graduated in 1992. Of course, that was immediately after the Gulf War. And if you remember back then, the first Gulf War, and there was a large military drawdown. And so the Air Force found itself in a situation where there were a lot more pilots than airplanes. And so they paused accessions to pilot training for a while. And I had to wait a few years. And so I was sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that is a base where a lot of aircraft and systems development is done. And I studied engineering at the academy, and so I was assigned to, at the time it was called a System Program Office. It might be called the same now, I'm not sure, but or SPO, System Program Office. So the SPO I was assigned to develop sensors for reconnaissance airplanes, and specifically I worked on systems for the U-2. And so these were systems that normally or typically my programs were electro-optical sensors, but the SPO also worked on radar for the U-2 as well as data links as well. And so that's what I did for about 2.5 years. And after that is when I went to pilot training in 1995.
Wow. And what was the first aircraft, or what were the aircraft that you got to fly in your pilot training?
Yeah, so at the time, well, let me back up a little bit. So everyone going to pilot training at the academy does a screening program, which at the time was in the airplane, the T-41, which is just a Cessna 172 with a much more powerful engine. It's got a 6-cylinder fuel injected engine that you fly for. It's like a 13 ride program for screening to, you know, just to identify those that might have trouble before they get into jets or that are a lot more expensive. And so at pilot training, I flew the T-37 and the T-38. The T-37 is long since been retired, but it was a twin engine jet, subsonic, pretty small, made by Cessna back in the 1950s, but it was a lot of fun to fly. And then that program, or that airplane, we flew for about 6 months, and then transitioned to the right transition to the T-38. So you start out in the T-37, and then from that point, after you complete that program, you track select, and you have 4 options. One was the T1, which is a Beast jet. I think it's the name of the civilian version, but it's basically a militarized business jet, and that's the airplane that you go to if you're going to fly tanker transport types of airplanes. Or you might go to, at the time, I think we sent pilots going to the helicopter or rotary wing to a Fort Rucker to train with the Army on the UH-1. So that's 2 options. The third option was pilots going to fly turboprops, particularly the C-130, would go and fly with the Navy on the T-44. I think down in Corpus Christi, but I'm not positive about that. And then those going to combat aircraft, either fighters or bombers, would train the T-38, which is what I did for about another 5 months in the T-38.
Tell me about flying the T-38.
Yeah, it's a really fun plane, and some people might characterize it as a very fast airplane. I characterize it as a plane that flies slow, very poorly, as opposed to saying it's fast. But it's a twin-engine supersonic airplane. Now that's kind of we don't fly supersonic. There's one flight in the entire solo of this that we fly supersonic, and it's just show you that the plane flies.
Just to burn fuel.
Same laws of physics exist on the other side of the sound barrier as they do on the subsonic side, but we really don't fly at that speed. But it's a lot of fun. It can be a challenge to land, and in fact there are quite a few accidents back in the late 60s and 70s. For the most part, the Air Force improved the training program so that those accidents really were reduced into the 80s and 90s. But it's still a plane that you can't relax on, especially at slow speeds and the traffic pattern below about 300 knots. The plane really does not like to fly at slow speeds, and obviously you have to fly well below that in order to land. And one thing you have to get used to is when you're in the traffic pattern, the plane is on the edge of a stall the entire time, and you are constantly feeling buffet when you are anytime in the traffic pattern, all the way down on downwind and through the base turn and on final. The plane is just shaking and buffeting like
really
oh yeah, it's that close that you feel it buffeting the entire time. You just get used to it.
Wow.
And at some point, the Air Force installed angle of attack indexers, which it's pretty brilliant. But it's a series of lights that tells you what your angle of attack is. Either it's on profile, in other words, the angle of attack where you should be, or it's too shallow, or what you don't want to see is it's too high. And I don't have the numbers that back it up, but I think that really helped to reduce the number of accidents, and it made it a lot safer and a little bit easier to just fly that angle of attack indexer. We call it the green donut because it's literally a green circle, and when that lights up, you're at a safe angle of attack in the traffic pattern.
That's so cool. I mean, we've got one from Alpha Systems, their angle of attack that in the general aviation world. So I know I've talked to Mark Corin who developed that, what that looks like, and it's very, very cool that made all the difference, of course, to being able to fly the T-38, which I never knew that about what it was like to fly in the pattern that you're getting buffeted around. So your first real deployment then, as I understand it, is in the amazing, legendary B-52. What is that like? Before we get to the B-2, its predecessor will probably outlive it. The B-52 that's a beast.
Yeah, it's a neat plane, obviously very iconic. It's the symbol of a lot of things. Some of them bad, I think they're mostly good. It's very unique shape. You can identify it even from miles and miles away. But I will say it's probably the most challenging plane I've flown as far as a yoke and rudder. It's a big lumbering beast, needs a lot of yoke forces to whip it around the traffic pattern and to air refuel. Obviously, 8 engines, all analog gauges. So there's something like 32 gauges that you have to monitor in flight, and you know, it's not as difficult as it sounds when you look for trends, but you do have to monitor them all. There's no ICAS system. There's no automatic monitoring system on the engines. You got to monitor it all yourself. And then flying it, I remember in the summertime just sweating profusely trying to practice touch and goes just because of the control forces, and it's never just stable. It never, at least in roll, the plane is always lumbering from left to right, and so you're constantly putting large control inputs into the yoke to keep it on your vector, to keep it going where you want it to go. And so you know, probably I feel like I probably lost a pound or two every time I'd fly it in the summertime in Louisiana. Of course, the air conditioner wasn't very good either.
That's crazy. And I understand landing on it is pretty unique as well.
Yeah, so the landing gear, if your viewers are able to look at it on a stock photo, it doesn't have a traditional nose gear. In fact, the front gear are the exact same as the rear gear. And the reason is just because the airplane lands at such a shallow attitude, it's really difficult to keep from hitting that nose gear first. I mean, you don't want to, but if it does, it's not dangerous. I mean, the plane will bounce and there's a threat of maybe getting into a PIO, a pilot-induced oscillation. But the plane can land even hitting the nose gear first, and so that's unique. And then also the plane has outrigger landing gear, and so you can't land in a wing low method like you do in some GA airplanes and even some commercial airplanes. You have to land flat, and because of that, if there's a crosswind, you still have to land flat. And so Boeing had the great idea of, well, let's just pivot the landing gears so that if your nose is facing, say, 5 degrees to the right, then we pivot all 4 main landing gear 5 degrees to the left, and so that you land in a crab and you slow down in a crab, and then when we get down to taxi speed, we'll just zero the crab out and taxi off the runway like that. And the first time you see it, it looks really, really strange. It's just not natural to see an airplane land in a crab and then continue to taxi down the runway in a crab.
I always thought of that as kind of like when things like a Cessna 195 or other aircraft had gear that would kind of adjust, but you've said that it's manually controlled.
Yeah, we control it in the cockpit. That's correct. It doesn't happen automatically.
Wow. And so you literally, like, I guess, have an indication to know exactly which way. I mean, how do you even get it exactly right?
Yeah, there's an indicator. It's got a little needle that points to the number of degrees. So we you know, it's a simple chart, a crosswind landing chart, but we look at our speed and the winds, and it tells you, okay, you need 4 degrees of right gear crab, and then we reach down and dial in 4 degrees, and then in theory, if the winds don't change, you know, the landing gear will land straight down the runway. I mean, you know, the winds do change, and so you get a little tire scrub, but it's nothing too significant.
Wow, that must be very, very cool. I want to show, before we move on to the B-2 itself, of course, I want to show a couple pictures that, that you sent. This is awesome. I love this picture. When is this from?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious from the clothes. That's from the very early 1970s. That's about 72 or 73, and I sent that to you just to illustrate the time frame where I started getting interested in jets, and that's me sporting the white pants. It's not easy. Not anyone can wear white pants, and I think it's pretty well.
You pulled it off really well.
But that was Okinawa, Japan, on the Kadena Air Base, and my dad, he was a major at the time, Major Reeves, next to me.
That is so cool. And then, of course, from the academy.
Yes, would have been late 91 or early 92. So that's the T-37. My hero shot standing next to it, and spent about 5 months training in this airplane. And the syllabus in this airplane, you did everything. I mean, you started out, we call it contact, but that's basically just basic flying skills. A lot of landings. I mean, just tons and tons of landings, of course, traffic pattern work, but also a full aerobatic demonstration was required. You're not required to be proficient. We're never going to, be on the level of a professional aerobatic performer, but you did have to be able to at least have confidence in the airplane and perform a recognizable aerobatic routine. And then you also do formation training in this, as well as low-level training and instrument training, of course, and then basic VFR navigation as well.
And that's the plane that basically makes everybody deaf.
Yeah. This nickname, or unofficial nickname, is the Tweet, because the engines. This airplane is obviously very old, and these engines were not the traditional axial flow jets like most jets are, if not all jets are today. These engines were centrifugal flow. It had a centrifugal compressor, just like you might see in a turbocharger, and the RPM of these engines, a typical RPM, was much higher. Actually, I don't quote me on that. I don't know if it's higher, but it was definitely louder, a much louder engine. I mean, very, very loud and very high pitched squeal.
Yeah, crazy. And then just a couple more here.
Yeah, my parents, excuse me, I included that picture just because I don't know of many pilots that are able to complete their journey without a lot of support from your parents. It's not easy, and if you go the civilian route, it's certainly not cheap. But this was later on in my career when I was at Whiteman Air Force Base flying the B-2, and we had a fleet of T-38s, and I can talk about why later on. But we were authorized to do some cross-country navigation training, and so every now and then I would go out and say hi to my parents.
That's awesome.
So this is my family, and that T-38 behind me was I flew that on my last flight in the Air Force. So this would have been spring or summer of 2014, my last flight. And in the Air Force, it's a tradition. They will do, at least most units will try to give a little celebration when it's the last time flying an airplane. And so for me, you can see a little red carpet. It's not really a carpet, but it's painted to be like a red carpet. And your crew chief will taxi you up there, and then for me and most pilots that I know, there'll be a fire truck there, and then your family gets to hose you down with a fire hose. And by the way, this is not a garden variety fire hose. This is a full-fledged, massive blast of inferno snuffing fire hose. And then also they greet you. You can see a bottle of champagne there, and that was a cold day, if I remember correctly. It was a very, very cold day.
So that's wonderful. Well, let's start talking about the B-2, because of course that is the monster, the aircraft that everybody's here. You were pretty close. Your schedule seems to be pretty close to the debut of the B-2 itself.
So the
operationally,
the B-2 first arrived at Whiteman Air Force Base it was definitely the early 90s. I want to say 1993. I'm not positive about that year. And so it was flying a good probably 8 years before I got to Whiteman Air Force Base, which was 2001. And so it wasn't quite there for the debut. It had been flying for a while. And in fact, I think that most of the aircraft had been built by the time that I got there.
Well, maybe deployment, I guess, is a better word to use.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, the first combat use of the B-2 was over Kosovo in 1998. And so I got there about 3 years after this first combat deployment.
Tell us a little bit about the aircraft itself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Before I forget, though, I want to point out, so I'm actually flying this airplane right here. This is on my initial check ride in the training squadron, and I'm right over at the base. We had an area fueling track and what we call a MOA, or a military operations area, and there's one right over Whiteman Air Force Base. And this is my initial check ride, and I in contact, I saw some flashes from the boomer pod where the boom operator sits in the KC-135, and it said, so we can talk to each other. There's an interphone line that goes through the boom, and so we can talk without having to use the radio. And said, hey, can you send me those pictures? And I passed him my email address, and he took very good pictures. I got quite a few. But anyway, about the airplane. So there are a number of things that make it unique and allow it to do what it can do. And first and foremost is the shape. And you can see by the shape there that if you can imagine yourself being a radar emitter just about anywhere, you can see how the energy is going to really try to be reflected everywhere except directly back at the emitter. And one thing that you may notice is that you will never find a right angle or a 90-degree angle anywhere on the airplane, because 90-degree angles are severe reflectors of radar energy. And so the plane does not have any 90-degree angles of any kind, at least when the gear is up and the weapons bay doors are closed and all that stuff. And so the shape, 90-degree angles, and then additionally, you'll see that there's nothing that's really radar reflecting that is not embedded. So a very large reflector of radar energy are the compressors on the engine, and you can't see them because they are completely submerged inside the airplane. So the air has to go through a kind of a circuitous route to get to the compressors. And same thing on the exhaust. After it leaves the turbine, it goes through somewhat of a circuitous route to leave the airplane, so that any radar behind the airplane isn't going to be able to get a reflection off of the turbines. And there is a little bit of a thrust loss because of that, of a few thousand pounds, but obviously it's necessary to achieve the primary mission of the airplane. And so shape, 90-degree angles, embedded compressors. Also, you'll see that there's nothing that extends, nothing that protrudes. All accessories, antennas, lights, air vents, any kind of door, all of those things are conformal. They are completely flush with the skin of the airplane. Obviously, wow. That helps to significantly reduce the radar cross section as well. And then even the flight controls, you can see the flight controls deflected slightly on the, we call those elevons because it's a combination of aileron and elevator. You can see the elevons deflect slightly, but right now that airplane, that stock photo is not in what we call penetration mode or stealth mode unofficially. When we go into stealth mode, those flight controls completely streamline, because any deflection of control surface is also a reflector of radar energy. And so those flight controls completely streamline with the airframe, and they basically don't move.
So how do you maintain directional control with nothing vertical and having control surfaces that don't move?
Yeah, so it's pretty unique. So the primary parameter that you need is that deflects control surfaces is a roll and yaw. There's very little movement for pitch, and so pitch occurs normally, but for roll and yaw, when we're in stealth mode, we modulate engine thrust to turn the airplane. And so typically, say you want to turn to the left, we will reduce RPM on the two left engines about 3%, and increase RPM on the two right engines about 3%, and the airplane will enter a nice shallow bank. Now you're not gonna roll up to 30 degrees doing that. It's just not that significant of a thrust change. But for very shallow banks, which is what we want to do, that's all you need to do in order to turn the airplane.
And what about pitch? How is pitch just?
Yeah, pitch is still controlled normally, but the flight control deflection for pitch is very small. It's minimal.
Wow. That is really that's really something, and it is an amazing shape. That's for sure. Before we go to the cockpit, let's talk a little bit about then obviously it's got a mission. Tell us about the mission of the B-2 itself.
Yeah, so officially the mission is strategic attack, but where the B-2 is going to be used is for high value targets in heavily defended areas. If it's not a high value target, or if it's not a heavily defended area, there are other planes that can do it for a lot less money, less effort, and maybe even do it better. But a high value target in a heavily defended area is where the B-2 is gonna earn its money. So that's going to be targets like command and control facilities, communications nodes, underground bunkers, maybe very critical air defense sites that, if that site was destroyed, might allow other non-stealthy or less stealthy airplanes to follow in behind. So those types of targets.
And what types of armaments, what type are on board?
Yeah, so the bread and butter weapon for the B-2 is the JDAM. That stands for Joint Direct Attack Munition. Officially, it's called the GBU 31, and I'm pretty sure that is a JDAM. In fact, I know that's a JDAM that you see. I think it is. It's hard to tell, but I think that's a JDAM being released right there out of the weapons bay. Although I've never seen that many fall out at one time, so I'm not sure what they were doing. But that's a typical weapon. It's a 2,000-pound class weapon that is precision guided via INS and GPS. It's very good. It's very accurate. It's been continuously updated and upgraded over the years. But that's kind of our standard weapon. But it also can carry the 500-pound version of that same weapon, which is the GBU 38. And so the 2,000-pound, the GBU 31, the B-2 can carry 16 of those on 2 rotary launchers. They're kind of hard to tell in this picture, but they're 2 weapons bays side by side. 1 rotary launcher at each bay, 8 weapons, 8 GBU 31s on each rotary launcher for a total of 16. The 500-pound version, we can carry 80 of those in the weapons bay. We have to remove the rotary 80. We have to remove the rotary launcher, and we put what's called a smart bomb rack assembly, or SBRA, and that can carry 80 weapons. That's a lot of iron to precisely put on an individually targeted aim point over bad guy land. That's a lot of iron to target precisely.
Even the 16 that's amazing, and this obviously looks like it's dropping most of the 16.
Yeah. And then in addition to those weapons, we do carry penetrating weapons that have a very heavy hardened case so that it can go through many feet of cement or stone. Think a cave complex or an underground bunker. Some of those weapons are the GBU 28, which is about a 5,000-pound class weapon, but also a weapon called this was in the media a lot back when I was flying the airplane, but a weapon called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the GBU 57. It's a 30,000-pound weapon, and a very hardened, I mean extremely hardened casing. I guess it's steel. I'm not sure what it's made out of, but obviously the purpose there is very, very deep penetration into very hardened targets, and the plane can carry 2, one in each bay.
30,000. 2 30,000-pound bombs.
Yeah, it takes up the entire weapons bay.
I can't imagine seeing loading of a 30,000-pound.
It's a little bit of art, a little bit of science. The weapons loaders at Whiteman are the best, I think, and they train load a very wide variety of weapons, and I can't explain how they do it, but it's a tight fit. I've seen it loaded in there. It's a tight fit.
Yeah, and you need a lift of some kind that can hold 30,000 pounds plus.
Yeah, I can't explain how it's done. I wish I could give you more details on that.
That's and now how do just out of curiosity, like with you go into situations where you have things like denied GPS coverage and things like that. How do weapons like this get used in those situations?
Yeah, we have a very good system. We have a way of it's an anti-jam system, and we can protect the signals, the GPS signals. Also, the antenna are mounted in places that obviously the jammer is always going to be on the ground. 100% of the time, the jammer is going to be on the ground, and so the antennas can be mounted in places that are shielded from jamming coming from the ground. So it's not too much of a concern.
Got it. That makes sense. So I want to take people into the cockpit a little bit, and so this is it's a two-person aircraft.
Yes, two pilots. And before I forget, the configuration of the pilots in the B-2 is unique. I don't know of any airplane that's like it. So normally the aircraft commander sits on the left side, and the what do you want to call it, the co-pilot, for lack of a better term, is on the right side. And in the B-2, it's reversed. The aircraft commander sits on the right side, but that person is not called the aircraft commander. That person is called the mission commander, and actually doesn't fly, or the intent is not to fly. The left seat pilot is the non-aircraft commander, and that person is called the pilot. And that person's mission is to fly the airplane. That person flies and does all the talk on the radio, and the intent is so that in an operational environment, on an operational mission, the mission commander in the right seat can focus on mission-related things, the weapons, the targets, the navigation system, the radar, and maybe talking to other assets that might be out there that we need to coordinate with. And so the right seat pilot is called the mission commander, and the left seat pilot is called the pilot. And the mission commander is also the aircraft commander and responsible for the entire accomplishment of the mission. It's just kind of unique that way.
Is it seniority based to some degree?
Well, so the configuration of pilots that I just described, that's a theoretical configuration, which is how we would operate on an actual combat mission. On a training mission, which obviously almost all the missions that we do are just for training, we switch off. Each pilot will fly about half the flight, and each pilot will get about half the weapons the training activity. And so, because you can do either job from either seat.
Oh, but, so you don't switch seats when you change role?
No. We don't switch seats. You can do either job from either seat, but that is the way that that's our concept of operations for operational missions, combat missions, is that the mission commander does everything mission related from the right seat, and the pilot sits in the left seat and just flies.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about what we see here.
Yeah, sure. So obviously everything on this is a stock photo. It's pretty popular.
Pretty scrubbed.
It's very scrubbed. So every screen up there is basically a systems screen. I can't see it very well, but it looks like one screen is a hydraulic system, one screen is the fuel system. Obviously, on the left side, you can see the attitude directional indicator, and one side is the engine display, but I'm talking about the four basic multifunctional display units, and so they're all very generic screens. There are other screens, of course, that we can call it that cannot be shown in a stock photo. But right. Basically, those MDUs, or multifunctional display units, they're all interchangeable. We can bring up any screen onto any location that we want to. Typically, just for standardization, we tend to fly more or less the same, so that you can fly with any pilot and you know what to expect. But that's what those MDUs are for. You can bring up any display that you want to. And then in the very center is the engine stack, just basic engine instruments that you will see in any jet, RPM, oil pressure, that kind of thing. Now on the center console, you can see the throttles. There are actually two sets of throttles. What I love about this cockpit is that you don't have to share throttles. I'm very possessive when I fly. I like my stuff, my controls. And so you can see the throttles for the right seat pilot, and then the left seat pilot, his or her throttles are well off to the left side, so you can't see them in this picture.
I was going to ask about that because you said the pilot's in the left. I thought, do you have to reach all the way over there like that?
Yeah, you just can't see them. And then the plane, as you can also see, has a stick, a standard stick grip that most jets have. It's a nice flying with the stick. The plane is very easy to fly, very responsive. Jeff, I could take you in the simulator. You'd be flying like a pro in about 5 minutes. It's very, very docile, very easy to fly. But let me get ahead of myself. So you can see you have it's called a data entry panel, just basically a keyboard just to the right of where the knee would be on the left seat pilot. And then the mission commander also has one, but again, it's just off of the picture on the right side of the data entry panel. They're not in the exact, the cockpit is not a mirror image of each other. It generally has the same controls for the most part, but some controls on these side panels are unique to either side.
Mm-hmm.
The mission commander has some communications controls, and the pilot has some controls for like the bleed air system and engine start and that kind of thing, if I remember correctly, that aren't necessarily mirror images. But the main controls that you need to fly the airplane are the same on both sides.
Wow. Tell me about the mission itself, because I mean, tell me about your deployment when you actually went into combat as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Yeah, so ironic thing about my deployment is that I actually wasn't a deployment. I actually flew combat right from my home base in the Whiteman Air Force Base. It was a 36-hour flight. Now, airplanes did deploy. There were a number of airplanes that did deploy forward to the British Indian Ocean territories, Diego Garcia. It's an island in the Indian Ocean. And there are advantages and disadvantages of operating out of Whiteman or operating forward. The advantages operating forward is that it's a much shorter transit time, and so less air refueling support, obviously less fatigue for the air crew, but tactically you have more flexibility because you can wait longer to take off before receiving your targets, and so you can make large changes to your targets, or you can get your targets later before having to take off. If you take off out of Whiteman, if you're going to have your targets on the ground, you need them almost 2 days before you take off.
So you can't, those don't get updated in flight? I mean, you're talking about a 36-hour flight.
Yeah, we do have the ability to receive targets in flight, and we do that quite a bit, but there's a little bit more small amount of risk there. I mean, it's something we train. We're very good at it, but there's an element of risk if you're punching targets in yourself as opposed to receiving it on the ground, where you can just directly load it up into the airplane. And so
most people realize like you said a 36-hour mission?
That's correct. My mission from Whiteman Air Force Base to Baghdad, the targets were in Baghdad and back, was just over 36 hours. And if an airliner did that, it would be a little bit less time because we have what's called timing trombones built into our flight plan, and it looks just like it sounds. It's a little bit of a trombone. The reason is because if we're a little bit late, or let's say the winds aren't as we planned, we have very limited ability to make up time just by flying faster. We're already flying very close to our top speed, and so we plan to get there early, and then if everything goes as planned, we shorten our trombone. And so that's how we control timing going to Baghdad, because we're meeting at tankers at a point in the sky at a certain time, and so we can't just show up an hour late or we're not going to get our gas, or an hour early we're not going to get our gas. The tankers expect us to be there on time, and we expect the tankers to be there on time. And so we have to control our timing by other ways than just pushing up the throttle or pulling it back. And so if an airliner were going to fly to Baghdad and back, it would be a little bit less than 36 hours. Then also we're spending some time in country itself, prosecuting our targets. But yeah, my mission was 36 hours, and that was pretty typical for all the flights that flew out of Whiteman Air Force Base.
How do you handle that? Are you sitting in the seat for 36 hours straight?
No, obviously we need a rest at some point, and there is just enough space behind the ejection seats to set up a standard green Army issue cot, and that's what we would do. And then during the flight, when there is not much going on, so between air refuelings, one pilot or the other would get off and rest. It sounds better in theory. In reality, I don't remember sleeping a whole lot on the way over there. I think I maybe slept a total of about 90 minutes for the first half of the flight, so the first 18 hours. And then I do remember coming, because you're a journal, you're pumped up, your adrenaline's going. And then after leaving the threat area, after we struck our targets and we're heading home now, I remember all the adrenaline leaving, and now just a tidal wave of fatigue washing over me, and that was the biggest threat and biggest struggle, was trying to stay alert and awake when I had to be, especially for the air refuelings for the remaining 15 hours going back westbound across the Atlantic.
How do you train for that type of situation? Obviously, they don't. You could be deployed with very little notice, I would imagine, and then also you've got this idea of how do you stay alert and for 36 hours, or even the first 18 of it, and then all of a sudden you have to be at the absolute top of your game.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is a skill that we do train for. First of all, the 509th Bomb Wing has an aerospace physiologist. That person does nothing except advise aircrew on how to stay at their peak level of performance on long duration flights. Everything from diet, proper diet, to how to manage your rest cycle with the other pilot's rest cycle, so that you're not both getting tired at the same time, and that at least someone is alert all the time. And then, of course, for critical times like prosecuting targets and air refueling, you have to both be alert. And this person does nothing but advise the pilots on how to manage that. But on top of that, we train for long duration missions periodically, and it's not nearly as much as would be nice for training, but I remember flying a long duration. I said long duration, so any flight over about 24 hours we call long duration, and we would do that about once a year. And sometimes we don't even leave the country. We just fly, see the four corners of the country, or fly to ping pong off the borders and go to Florida, Maine, Texas, North Dakota, California, Washington. Just fly around, and we do training activities, air refueling. Of course, we have to do that, and we do simulated weapon releases. We fly for 24 hours, then we land, and we try to get everybody a long duration flight, about once a year or so, just to stay in the practice of it, because it is a perishable skill, and it's something that you have to practice at to stay good at. Practice your how you're going to rest, and your diet, and little techniques that you need to do to stay alert in the cockpit.
Have you found that helps the rest of your life, and even now in the in kind of commercial airline world?
Maybe a little bit, but I'm on the 737, and so we don't fly more than about 7 hours, thank God, because I can't, at my age, I can't do that
anymore. You're done doing that kind of thing?
I can't.
What's the future? What do you see as the future of the B-2 and how it works in the kind of the bigger scheme of things?
Yeah, so it's already set for sundown. Current plans have the airplane retiring about 2030-ish. I mean, they're not going to retire them all at one time, but they'll be phased out over a period of a few years, and they will be replaced by the B-21, a fantastic airplane that is also being by Northrop Grumman. and that will be coming online. I think in the next few years. I know the first flight of the B-21 Raider occurred just a few days ago, right before Thanksgiving, or right around Thanksgiving. And those airplanes are going to be coming online and gradually replace not just the B-2 but the B-1 as well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly what some of the specifics of the plans for the B-2 are, but I imagine that they're going to slowly stop upgrading it, and around the 2030 timeframe, plus or minus a year or two, they'll start retiring it.
When you talk about a complete mission as to what you've done, you talk obviously a lot about refueling. That's a big part of support. What else, like when you were on your combat mission, what else is happening in the whole kind of cadre of aircraft that allow you to perform your mission?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on, both even pre-takeoff and then pre-strike, and it starts way back with intelligence, and we have a great intelligence community, intel officers and intel journeymen at Whiteman Air Force Base. So very large contingent of support, and they do a lot of very hard work preparing the mission and the targets and the air crew and able to accomplish their mission. And then obviously we need a lot of air refueling support. My one flight involved 5 air refuelings, 2 pre-strike and 3 post-strike, just to get the aircraft from Whiteman into the country and then back. On top of that, we always want to be able to integrate with other airplanes and other assets. I mean, we have the capability to go in alone if we need to, but we perform better with support, particularly a jamming support. We might need or desire to have a support from air-to-air fighters, particularly other stealthy aircraft, the Raptor, the F-22. And we do a small amount of training with them, not as much as we'd like to, but there are tactics that we have in coordination with that community, because we don't have a gun, we can't shoot down other airplanes. We need if the worst case scenario happens, and it's unlikely that another enemy aircraft would detect us, but we're not invisible to the eyeball. We especially if there's a moon in the night or a starry night, we make contrails so we can be seen. And so we want support from air supremacy airplanes like the Raptor. And then now the F-35 wasn't flying when I was flying the B-2, but I would imagine it's integrated now as well. I don't know for a fact. Also, decoys. We'll want to integrate with those as well. Yeah. And standoff weapons. We would like there might be a key radar or a key threat that we want taken out even before we even get into the area. And so we might have some standoff that might come from an Air Force asset, might even come from a naval asset, but we want to integrate with standoff weapons as well. Yeah.
Do you last question, do you miss it when you see it at air shows or flyovers or things like that?
I do. I mean, what I tell people is I miss the flying. I don't necessarily miss everything else that comes along with it, because I talk to people at air shows, like you mentioned, and I do think that some people have the impression that all we do is just fly. We just walk out to the airplane, we fly, we land, and then we goof off the rest of the time. And everything that goes along with a flying career in the military, a very small percentage is actually flying. There's a lot of training, a lot of studying, a lot of testing, a lot of exercises, the exercises where you don't even get to fly. And so I don't necessarily miss everything that goes along with it, but I do miss the flying.
Excellent. Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking time to join us this evening here on SocialFlight Live, and I appreciate it. It was wonderful meeting with you out at AirVenture, and it's just great to get this inside scoop on what it's really like having to do with the B-2 bomber and your service. So I am grateful for your service, and thanks for coming on the show as well.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. It was a real pleasure to meet you out at Oshkosh, and and just appreciative that you have me on your show. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Take care. And to all of you, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. We'll be back next week, hopefully without any audio issues, with Dick Rutan and war stories from Vietnam and the Cold War. Really, really amazing stories. And his book, The Next 5 Minutes, in addition to talking about his round the world flight, goes into that. I would strongly encourage you to join us for this amazing story with Dick Rutan coming back on. And then on Tuesday, December 12th, Jason Morrison of Rebuild Rescue is here. Just a great YouTube star, does some wonderful things on YouTube, rebuilding abandoned aircraft, and he'll be here on the show. On Tuesday, the 19th, we are here with Barry and Brian Schiff on the show. And then a very special holiday show, Tuesday, December 26th at 8 p.m. Don't miss this one. Robert Hayes, the star of Airplane the Movie, will be here joining us for a special holiday show. Until next time, I'm Jeff Simon for Social Flight. Blue skies.